I've always felt, well, I've always thought that I felt lukewarm towards Metroidvania games, even though I own like 40 billion of them. I have a bad habit of starting some games and forgetting about them until I revisit them years later, and I don't restrict that to Metroidvanias. But that genre specifically seems to suffer my impatience and frustration more than any other genre. Like, I first started playing Yakuza 3 in 2015, I got frustrated with it, stopped playing, and then picked it up again in December 2017 before proceeding to play through all 7 Yakuza games in the span of 6 months, including a 5-week intermission where I was literally in Japan and could not play. No, I was not okay. And last winter, I told myself to do the same with more games, except good ones. I played Bloodborne all the way through after trying for 5 years to get into it and repeatedly backing off out of frustration. I booted up Blasphemous in late winter this year because I was interested in a similar challenge, but I also wanted to give Metroidvanias another go, in spite of the fact that it's clearly designed to repel someone like my totally not tenacious past self. I am proud to say I barreled through it without quitting, although I came very, very close. We'll get to that. Blasphemous is a Metroidvania Soulslike. You play as the penitent one, navigating a hellish world of folks of such mad, orgiastic, and devout religiosity that every conversation with an NPC plays like a secret audio diary from a fiendish masochistic conical parishioner. You get the sense as you play that you're not really a hero or villain, you're just kind of an agent of stabbing, hastening the world and the people in it towards an inevitable end with your slashy stick. Those who are familiar with Metroidvania games will quickly recognize many of the conventions of the genre. You start out with a bare-bones toolkit, a vague sense of where to go, and a seemingly endless supply of locked doors. As you progress, you pick up new items and abilities that present new solutions to previously unsolvable puzzles. The Souls-like aspects of the game derive from its difficulty, naturally, and the way that it handles death. When you die, you leave a grave that you can retrieve for a health boost, and instead of immediately losing experience or tears of atonement or blood or souls, whatever, your magic— what are these things called? Why can't they just have a universal language? Your magic bar is partially locked off. If you die on the way to your grave, it doesn't disappear either. You can leave shit tons of the things lying around for whenever you're ready to get them, or you can go to a confessor statue or beat a boss to absolve yourself of guilt. Confessor statues can also be destroyed to reveal a bonus level, so if you do that and you have no immediate boss fights available, well, you're a fucking goof. Go get the guilt. Unless the game hates you and does this on the hardest boss. I didn't serve 3.5 years at EB Games to be treated like this by video games! Marrying Metroidvania and Souls-like mechanics is an intuitive choice. Both genres are notable for their map design's interconnectedness. Metroidvanias incentivize backtracking by scattering locked doors that can be opened at later stages in the game throughout earlier areas, or by creating loops and secret passages that lead from later parts of the game to earlier parts. Souls-likes bury formidable but avoidable boss fights in places where a novice who is unfamiliar with the genre will definitely be taken off guard. You can cycle back later or find a route around and just never face it. The puzzle, for lack of a better word, in Souls-likes is baked into the process of learning to read an enemy's telegraphs. Eventually, you come to expect certain speeds and intensities from different enemies, but letting your guard down or turning off the active learner in your brain will result in death. And that's the sort of mindset behind a lot of the environmental traps in Souls-likes as well. It's a similar case in Blasphemous. See, when I recorded this footage, I was on my second playthrough. I know how to jump over a spike pit, but I threw on a podcast and I got too passive. The first time I played through Blasphemous, I didn't realize that these misty areas were actually death zones. I jumped out thinking I was super smart and it just found a shortcut to like the lower part of the screen. And I learned the hard way that it wasn't. At least, it wasn't at first. There are these gilded craniumed cherub things that you can get as collectibles if you free them from the hand guardian that's trapping them. When you're in this area, you can come across a painting that's like, hey, those are my brothers. And then you enter the painting and there's a big one and he rewards you with this. The golden fleece. I mean linen. Do you want to know what this does? Hey, so during this entire video, I actually call this item the golden linen. That's the wrong name. You know it, I know it. Now we can move on. Okay, thank you. It turns all those misty death pits into shortcuts. This changes everything. That's what I said out loud when I got the item. This changes everything. I said it like that. The golden linen thread turns hazards into gates. You didn't realize it before, but all this time, when you were jumping over these things to just not die, you were actually passing a locked door without taking notes for later. There's a few reasons why this is such an exciting thing. It alleviates frustration, like if you've managed to get this far, you deserve a break and you shouldn't have to backtrack through such familiar terrain all the time. It can be kind of an arduous commute sometimes. Because it functions like a secondary fast travel system where it cuts through all this dead space, It makes backtracking a little bit less annoying. God, I can't say words. You don't have to rely as heavily on getting to the portals to avoid taking a long way around. You can just jump down. The added benefit to equipping this item is that it offers you a mulligan with a certain quest line. When you're in the Wasteland of Buried Churches for the first time, you can either go up to the mountain or down to the sewer area. On my first run, I went up and I met a guy called Jamino who was turning into a tree and begged me for the sweet release of death. So I backtracked. I beat a different boss, and then I beat the boss in Jamino's area, and I came back to find he had turned into a fucking tree because I was too slow. Once you meet Jamino, you have to beat the nearest boss right away. This posed a bit of a roadblock for me because completing Jamino's quest is supposed to unlock this tomb, so you can get this fucking thing that I already don't even care about. I thought that I had permanently missed out. Then I got the golden linen, and I could access the tomb. Suddenly, the game was open to me in a way that I hadn't thought possible. I wanted to scour all the blank spots on the map and try to find out if I was missing certain shortcuts. I wanted to print off a copy and draw lines between the different areas just to make sure I had a grasp on all the shortcuts and had gotten every single item. It felt like an epiphany, a gorgeous epiphany. Transition. In a 2016 interview with GameSpot, Donald Mustard talked about the ideas that informed the development of Shadow Complex, another Metroidvania game that I had never heard of before now. He says that games like Metroid work so well because they lead the player towards epiphanies. I think Metroid is one of the best games for epiphany moments because of the logic telling you, if you do this and this, you can now do this. And when you go back to it and you're successful, you feel so smart and empowered. Mustard borrowed that idea from an interview that Jonathan Blow gave in Gama Sutra in 2014. Oh my god, I'm hurtling towards the end of my finite existence. I know Blow has a reputation for being high-minded at times, but he has a passionate faith in games' artistic merit that helps him see what's valuable about games, and to really understand how to make the experience good for the player. Like in the Gama Sutra interview, he says that it's those moments when we step away from games, when we're doing mundane, everyday things that lead us to epiphanies. The clearer and simpler the puzzle is, the more beautiful and strong that feeling of epiphany can be. If you get frustrated and you rage quit, you're still able to process what you just experienced and maybe think of a solution to some problem and make a comeback. I disagree with pretty much everything in Adam Millard's video on Metroidvania games. Millard suggests that most Metroidvania games are copying Metroid and Castlevania when they include similar abilities like a double jump, or when they explore similar themes around parenthood, isolation, and societal decay. If I were to summarize his criticisms, I would say that he's probably taking issue with certain games that fail to innovate enough to differentiate themselves from the original games within the genre. Okay, so there's an implicit assumption here that new things are better by virtue of their novelty, and if you loved me at all, you would never say this. Sometimes works of art can employ all the typical conventions of the genre or the medium in order to make a criticism or commentary of the genre or medium itself. Blasphemous is one of those games. I reject the idea that similar works of art in the same genre are copying foundational texts when they employ similar devices or when they explore similar themes. I think that argument is similar to suggesting that horror films are all copying the 1920-something German expressionist film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari because they explore madness, mental illness, and anxiety, or that all sonnets are copying Shakespeare specifically because they're about love and they use the same rhyme scheme. I think the point Adam's missing is that these genres or mediums are actually more appropriate or apt for exploring certain ideas, and that's why they all tend to have similar material or themes. It's not because there's outright copying going on. The thing I really want to push back against, though, is the idea that a reactive and organic world is what's integral to the Metroidvania experience. There is change, yes, and that's essential for establishing tone, but the physical space is technically the same from start to finish. What's different is how the player navigates that space. Those misty zones that I was trying to jump into at first were always potential gates, even if I was experiencing them as hazards. I think that the most reactive element of Metroidvania games is the player. Whatever is most conducive to eliciting powerful epiphanies in the player is the most essential element of Metroidvania games. And sometimes what's most conducive is going to be establishing a sense of familiarity, even if you're just going to subvert it later. So how do Metroidvanias lead players to epiphanies? Ingenious Gaming touches on this idea, saying that as you explore Metroidvanias, you end up in an earlier area, which is the developer's way of hinting that if you retread some of your steps, you might discover a new way to progress. He says that it's not always possible to do this, partly because having a map of 100 tiny circles would be a predictable and uninteresting gimmick. I dissent. That is already what Metroidvania maps are. I don't think the circles become gimmicky at any point. The way that we realize they exist can feel tired, sure. Blasphemous is the only Metroidvania I have footage of right now on my hard drive, so it's the only one I'm gonna give as a counterexample, but by the time you get the Golden Linen in Blasphemous, you've likely unlocked fast travel, you've become accustomed to most of the game's hazards and barriers. Then, this optional little shitty cloth converts all that blank space into potential shortcuts. The number of routes that you could take to a certain point refract like light through a prism, and you're spoiled for choice. I can't imagine these kinds of games as anything but hundreds of tiny circles. In an old Iwata Asks interview from 2008, Kensuke Tanabe describes exploration in Metroid as a system where the player is widening the map. I like this word a lot. This is very different from thinking of exploration in Metroidvanias as discovering a new map altogether. Epiphany, the word, has a religious background according to the dictionary, which is aesthetically speaking appropriate for the highly Catholic-inspired world of Blasphemous. I think it's important to note, though, that what's core to Epiphanies is insight. Rather than stumbling upon something completely new, you start to see something that you already know of in a radically different way. Epiphanies come from revisitations, they are realizations, and they build revolutions. Do you think I could be a rapper based on what you just heard? Metroidvania games like Blasphemous change the way that you see so that you feel that the world has evolved because, well, you've evolved. In practice, that's not so different from being the same person in an entirely different place. I can't think of a way to transition, so I know on this channel I talk about a lot of abstract ideas. Some of them can be hard to understand at first, and they can be even harder to care about. I try to share things that got me to reconsider something that I had previously felt sure were true. Things that led me to an epiphany so that when I turned back to what was familiar, it looked alien, but in an exciting and good way. Sometimes, after these epiphanies, it seemed like physics had been distorted or shortcuts had opened up in space-time. Blasphemous led me to think about the way that I think. There's a word for that, it's metacognition. And actually, Blasphemous made me think metacognitively when I was about to quit it forever. The second to last boss is named Chrysanta. She's got the best voice actor in the game.
You have committed the most serious crimes against the Mother and her saints, against the miracle and its outbreaks.
And she is infuriatingly difficult. 90% of her moves are basically insta-kills. You can't let your guard down for a second or she'll get a combo in that erases the concept of hit points. You have to precisely time your healing, otherwise you'll just get wrecked and have wasted your one little stupid vial. Her telegraphs for different attacks are barely different from one another. It's really easy to mistake them when you're panicky and your hands are sweaty and mom's spaghetti. And the worst part about the fight is that unlike most other boss rooms where the save or respawn point is placed just outside so you can quickly jump back in, the nearest save point for Chrysanta is down an elevator shaft and a screen to the left. The walk to Chrysanta's fight is an excruciating 40 seconds long. You have to jump over this gap and you have to wait for the elevator to come back down to get you. You have to ride it up to the top. You have to walk to the right, wallow in self-pity. You have to skip through Chrysanta's dialogue, which plays every time the fight starts.
Excommunicate you, expel you, execrate you.
There's a slight delay, and then you can fight her, only to die within 10 seconds. I wanted to delete video games when I was stuck on this boss because I couldn't charge in and try again every time I failed. I couldn't prove my fucking worth and regain my honor. If I had to guess how much of the 17 hours of my first playthrough was spent on this fight, I would say probably at least 3 were spent working on just her. I had a friend on Discord coaching me through the fight, that's how much of a lost cause I was, and I hated this boss. I wanted to stop playing. I wanted to stop riding that fucking elevator. I love the art, the music, the design, the mechanics, most of the challenging combat. I loved the shop. I loved the shop. Everything else about this game. I was willing to leave it all behind because of the walk to fight Chrysanta. But then I did some thinking, and here's the thing about this commute. It does have a redeeming quality. It forces you to calm down, to get your breathing in check, wipe your disgusting hands off, and concentrate. You're far more likely to rage quit something when you're enraged, and the probability of you becoming enraged is lessened if you have to take the time to calm the fuck down. A game designed with this much intention doesn't usually have a space for downtime for no reason, and this is where the real golden linen is found. It's the golden linen in your revolutionary gamer mind. It opens up new pathways in your medulla oblongata, Things that feel like insurmountable blocks will eventually become second nature to surpass. The first thing I loved about Blasphemous was this mechanic that changed the way I understood the game space. The second thing I loved about Blasphemous was the space it gave me to understand myself. And that's the power of art. It's a way to approach and reconsider things that you've always felt to be true. The beautiful part about thinking about art is it gets you to reconsider again and again, so you can keep learning new things by backtracking through life. That's it, that's the end. I'd like to thank my very special patrons from Patreon, Femi, Josie Phillips, Sheldon W, Shreya Gimiray. They helped make this video less of a money sink, so thanks. If you can't contribute to my Patreon, that's fine. I have a link though in the description if you would like to. These videos are gonna come out no matter what. If you don't trust me with your money, we can't do anything about that, so